I don't know, Katazan. What about the Bering Strait? The Bering, if I may. Nobody said no. The Bering Strait is bullshit.
That's right.
You understand? That is a goddamn lie from the devil in the earth. So now the Bering Strait myth is not so much science as it is politics. Much objective modern science in the past several decades has even suggested that it is highly questionable if there ever was a so-called land bridge or ice bridge, as some have defined it. Yes, that's right. From an in-depth, intensive, non-politically affected, and unbiased scientific study of the Earth's history, countless scientists, mostly non-American, you starting to see a pattern here? Mostly non-American have concluded that there most likely never was a land bridge. Most U.S. history books and many other books written about the North American indigenous people began by propagating the Bering Strait myth, telling the silly story of thousands, even millions of early First Nation people migrating from Asia across the so-called land bridge, the Bering Strait. Next slide. We're going to destroy this today. Also known as the Bering Strait, the theory of Beringer theory, the land bridge theory, has been widely accepted since the 1930s. The idea was first postulated in a rudimentary fashion, meaning what? No science at all. This was a theory, a thought, which was by who? A Jesuit. You know anything about the Jesuits? Their whole job is to distort the truth. You understand? Like Commander General Yohanna said it best. If the Catholic Church is the American government, then the Jesuits are their CIA. They infiltrate organizations in order to make them what? Start teaching Immaculate Conception. Start getting closer to the Catholic doctrine. Because they realized it don't matter if you're directly aligned with us as long as you're teaching what we teach. So Jose de Acosta was one of these people who came over in 1590, and he created this theory. And as a result, everybody started to run with it. Next slide. This book right here used to be $30. It's $800 now, ever since we did breakdowns on it. That's why if y'all want to know why I'm not putting the book listing out yet, or the complete book listing, it's because I want y'all to be able to get these books before they raise the prices. So after this lecture, I'm going to be sending out the book list. Get what you can, because I guarantee you they're all going to be skyrocketing on Amazon. So now, this is Unexpected Faces Inside of Ancient America. And what you're going to find out is that he did a history and said that without a doubt, we had to have come across the Atlantic. There's no way that we didn't sail. There's no way that we came from Siberia. Next slide. Looking carefully at all the faces on the poster, one begins to wonder if the ancestors who produced this extreme variety of racial types could really have been channeled exclusively through the gateways of Siberia and Alaska. The New World, there came a moment where I felt almost like a child who finds out that Santa Claus is not real, and that the simplistic explanation of the Bering Strait alone would not be the ultimate solution of the complicated problem of America's ancient population and history. I am not the only one to have suspicions about the Bering Strait theory. Charles Bennett, anybody saying something? What's up? Y'all good? No sweat. So now, he wrote a book called The Mysteries from the Forgotten World and gives a summary on what's now being discussed and investigated and disputed amongst the ancient American history. In chapter 8, he says, most anthropologists accept the theory that the ancestors of the American Indians once walked from Siberia over the frozen Bering Strait and eventually populated the Americas from Alaska to the southern tip of Tierra del Fuego. With the wild tribes and civilized empires and nations found in America and the first European explorers. Everyone seems to believe this except the Indians themselves. Past and present, who have conserved oral, written, and pictorial traditions of their province, practically none of which have to do with Siberia, meaning none of them do. To this statement, one should add The Prudent Myths of Pre-Columbian America by Donald A. Mackenzie, written about 50 years ago, and now difficult to find, just like all the books, just like they removed the pages of 13 Tribes. They keep removing this information so we get stuck with their propaganda and their theories. So now, longer the story short, when they turn around and say a lot about the oral traditions and pictorial traditions of the Native Americans, both authors seem to believe that the Indians are not as quite ignorant concerning their history as some people seem to presume, and that the modern white man is not necessarily always right about the ancient past of America. Because once again, you're smarter than the white man. The white man is the devil that the Bible speaks of. Right. And they covered up this history. Next slide. So now, the professionals tend to be indoctrinated along the lines of accepted opinion, and they better had be if they desire smooth careers. I remember meeting the czar of Amerindian ethnology at the Smithsonian. I want y'all to embed this word into your brain right now, the Bureau of Ethnology, because I'm going to revisit this later. So now, in this Bureau of Ethnology, you understand, Alex Hildrecker, when I was very young in those days, anyone who challenged his thesis at all, that the Indians had come across the Bering Strait, would find it difficult to get a job anywhere in that field. Hildrecker is dead, but his intellectual tyranny has not yet expired. This was not based on science when they discovered it. It was a goddamn lie made by a Jesuit because of manifest destiny. If they were to turn around and prove that the North American Indians came from a civilization such as, oh, say, the Jews, someone you'd have to respect, they wouldn't have been able to take the land. Right. So what they did was they made sure that they indoctrinated anybody to keep pushing this theory. And you're going to find out later why, to this day, they will not admit that we are the 12 tribes of Israel. But they made it an indoctrinated event so that you cannot teach this inside anywhere. So that's why people say, oh, well, I can't find the source. You can't find the source because they won't let you find the source. Right. Next slide. Native Americans have denied the Bering Strait theory, which is what we went over. The politicians also stated that it was America's manifest destiny to expand westward across the North American continent, bringing democratic ideals to less enlightened peoples. Once again, it was propaganda because remember what I said earlier, they thought we were savages. They turned around and it was all their prejudice that they wrote about. Next slide. Need you to stay locked in. I know you're trying to focus on the information. Stay with me, brother. You're doing a good job, though. So now we're about to get in. This is one of the authors. You understand? This is James Adair. James Adair lived amongst the North American Indians, and he's arguably the most significant 18th century worker on the Southeastern Indians. The History of the American Indians, published in London in 1775. So now he starts talking about his first-hand observations derived from his 40 years career as a deerskin trader amongst the North American Indians. So now what he turned around and said is that the Indians are of Hebrew descent, the lost tribes of Israel. And the reason why he did this is because he started studying how they lived. He wasn't trying to enslave them. He was just trying to get to know them. And upon getting to know them, he said, yo, they're following Levitical law. Next slide. Some have supposed for the Americans to be descended from the Chinese. They try saying we're Mongoloids. And even if you try saying we're a Mongoloid, you're whitewashed. That comes from Johann Blumenbacher. He said that everybody comes from 3 different races, Mongoloid, Negroid, and Caucasoid. The Bible said we come from Shem, Ham, and Japheth. What are you smoking? You understand? There's something wrong with you. So now, neither their religion, laws, or customs agree in the least with those that of the Chinese, which sufficiently prove they are not of that line. So now he starts going into how all these different ships that the Chinese had, they couldn't even sail over here. Next slide. So now what he starts breaking down is that their ceremonies, their customs, we couldn't have come from Scythia. We couldn't have come from Siberia. None of our customs match with any of them. Next slide. But there's something very interesting that he puts 2 and 2 together. So he starts saying that when you start to look at all the different settlements from Peru and Mexico, several of the Indian nations assure us they crossed the Mississippi before they made their present northern settlements, which connected with the former arguments will sufficiently explode that weak opinion that the Aborigines are descended from the Tartars or ancient Scythians, meaning what? Go take a look at all the pyramids, all the major, you understand, look at the Aztecs, look at the Incas, look at the Mayas. Where's all their civilizations located? South America. So why is it that they would start in Alaska, decide to say F the rest of the land, move all the way down to South America, and then start building pyramids in their civilization? No. Their migration started south. They moved north and then crossed the Mississippi. So meaning what? They came from the southeast. They didn't come from the northwest. So what does that mean? You can get that Bering Strait theory out of here. You understand? We crossed the Atlantic because we are the lost tribes that it was talking about in Ezra's. Next slide. So now, but history and the origin of tribes. This is in James Adair's book on page 72. It says, but history and the origin of tribes and nations have hitherto been covered with a great deal of obscurity. Some ancient historians were ignorant, others prejudiced. Some searchers into antiquities adopted the traditional tales of their predecessors, and others looking with contempt on the origin of the tribes and societies altogether exploded them without investigation. So when you start hearing that we were cannibals, when you start hearing that we were savages, it was the propaganda that they put based on the prejudice of the people who came here and didn't give a damn about really studying us. So you got to be careful, because anyone in history has an agenda. You have somebody who has an agenda who says what? The transatlantic slave trade happened. Then you have America's agenda, which is what? Trying to cover up their ugly history, saying it was the transatlantic migration. Well, that's the same thing with the North American Indians. Next slide. Yeah, now we in it. Now we at the chart. You understand? That was just the introduction. The lecture has officially started, all right? Give it up. Osana first.